And I call the member for Noosa.
Thank you, Mr Acting Speaker. The Environmental Protection, Great Barrier Reef Protection Measures and Other Legislation Amendment Bill 2019 has two parts, as we have heard. This first section aims to implement stronger regulation measures to improve the quality of water entering the Great Barrier Reef, Queensland's most iconic natural asset, worth around $56 million to the economy and employing over 64,000 Queenslanders. The 2017 Scientific Consensus Report, which resulted from a multidisciplinary group of scientists overseen by the Independent Reef Science Panel, concluded that barrier reef ecosystems continue to be in poor condition due to the collective impact of extreme weather events, climate change impacts such as warming waters, land runoff associated with past and ongoing catchment development and coastal development activities. In keeping with the target set out by the joint Australian and Queensland government's Reef 2050 Water Quality Improvement Plan 2017-22, the bill has a focus to achieve a 60% reduction in nitrogen loads and a 25% reduction in sediment loads. Acting Speaker, however, in its current form, the bill does not make clear how these water quality targets for each catchment area will be applied to non-agricultural and industrial sector activities, such as mining and port maintenance dredging, nor how the bill interacts with other regulatory tools, such as the Sustainable Ports Act 2015 and existing state and federal offset legislation. This siloing of contributors makes it difficult to assess the situation in isolation and has appeared to our farming communities that they are again being targeted and, as a result, vilified by coastal communities. This is unacceptable. They not only feed us, they do so facing challenges that many could never comprehend. Acting Speaker, there are other concerns which have been outlined in submissions from stakeholders, including environmental councils, advocacy groups and farmers, and I will summarise a couple. Firstly, the current point source water quality offsets policy, which enables environmental authority holders to meet their point source water emission discharge requirements through investing in offsets such as river restoration, improved farm practice or wetland construction. The majority of these offsets have not been taken up and reportedly not available to farmers. Secondly, the proposed new regulatory framework sets minimum standards for all farming activities. While this legislation seeks to reward producers who have adopted best management practice models, the extra regulatory burden placed on farmers, many of whom are either in or still recovering from drought and floods and already operating under these BMPs, could have unintended consequences. Further, the blanket approach financial support offered to each producer to seek professional advice to develop a compliant environmental management plan could be more effective if directed to those identified by Extension officers as needing it the most, especially in financial and environmental vulnerable sites. Acting Speaker, the audit report on water quality in the GBR also outlines difficulties in regard to land management practices, with the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries still unable to adequately report on the level of practice change in management practice because it does not possess the necessary management practice data to measure that change. Additionally, data collected for the Reef Report Card only included farms that had received grants, whereas the majority of farmers had self-funded initiatives, including sediment ponds. As farmers stated, and we've heard earlier, they cannot afford to lose their soil, fertiliser or water, as these are costly, and with margins of only between 1% and 2%, this would lead to financial losses and their livelihood. The Burnett-Mary region, previously excluded as deemed not impacting on the reef, are now included, with industry demonstrating that 70% of the runoff from their farms going through at least one settling pond and hard cover coral increasing by 50% between 2009 and 2015, they understandably cannot understand the rationale for them to be included. As submitted by the Mary River Catchment Coordinating Committee, the regulations, quote, will theoretically result in higher ground cover, pasture levels and improved grazing land management, but will not directly impact on the key sources of sediment for the Mary River catchment. Acting Speaker, a common agreement from both farming and environmental advocates was that targeted financial assistance is needed for key vulnerable areas that contribute to the majority of sediment runoff, which includes gullies and riverbanks. With a reported only 10% of applicants to grants funded due to oversubscription, increased regulations cannot overcome the reality that some of our farmers need funding partnerships. There was also a clear message from these communities for the return of the numbers of extension services and officers of the past, whom are intimate with farmers in their region and trusted for their advice and expertise. A common response to questions asked during the public hearings on whether the results required from this legislation could have been achieved under the current legislation with targeted funding, the answer was yes. New legislation without targeted funding for projects will not deliver the outcomes sought. Acting Speaker, the second part of the bill recommends the common assessment method for threatened species to take effect across associated legislation to address the lack of consistency in listing nationally threatened species. This will provide greater protection for threatened species and their habitat through a suite of welcome amendments to the Fisheries Act 1994, National Conservation Act 1992 and Vegetation Management Act 1999, and is to be commended. However, it is important to note key findings from the Auditor General Report 2018-19/7, Conserving Threatened Species, that highlighted some concerning gaps in the Department of Environment and Science's implementation of a cohesive and coordinated strategy to manage conservation and recovery efforts, particularly in the process of listing threatened species in Queensland. Going forward, it is imperative that all departments work together with the scientists, traditional owners, environmental policy and planning and the dedicated frontliners, including QPWS and local conservation groups, to rebuild these habitats. This takes funding, and we consistently hear from volunteer-based groups that it has become increasingly impossible to undertake works when grants are oversubscribed. However, as the audit stated, a strategy is needed urgently, and it is pleasing to receive updates that the 7 recommendations are well advanced, including an overarching biodiversity conservation strategy. Good work, everyone. Acting Speaker, overall, the inquiry into this bill regarding the GBR has shown that every single stakeholder is committed to the health of the reef, however have concerns on the appropriate methodology to achieve better outcomes. Questions are being asked why it is only the farming community being targeted when, as the scientific consensus report concluded, it was a combination, including coastal developments such as housing, as well dirt roads, gullies and erosion on state-owned lands. There is also discontent surrounding that we have been repeatedly told that the greatest challenge to the reef is extreme weather events and warming of waters, and we cannot overlook Queensland's role as the 3rd largest exporter in the world of fossil fuels. If we subscribe to the belief surrounding the contributors to climate change, we need to be consistent in our efforts to avoid being labelled as hypocrites. The amendments to this bill I support in its admirable intent. However, as outlined in my statement of reservation, there must be targeted funding for farmers, streamlining of water quality offset legislation and extra extension officers on site to assist our farmers. Additionally, an independent audit of the findings of the scientific consensus statement to give assurances around the concerns found during this investigation. In closing, I thank my fellow ITDE committee, the Auditor-General, Minister Enoch, departments and agencies for their incredible hard work, all submitters and especially those that travelled many miles to attend the public hearings. It was heartening to see everyone committed to the endeavours regarding reef health and being prepared to work together to get this right. Now, it's up to us as MPs to ensure they all have the appropriate level of assistance and that, as Queenslanders, we support our farmers in their efforts, as well that of our threatened species and their habitats. Thank you.
I thank the member and call the member for Stratton.
Thank you.